well, I've slipped and fell twice. He didn't say what he slept and fell in, but if you have that much lube and that much baby oil, you can kind of figure it out. Hey everybody, Charles here. Day 23 in Diddy's federal trial. And we learned a little bit about post-freak-off slip and falls. It happened to someone. We will explain what they were slipping and falling in just a little bit later. Stick around for that. But Diddy was not the person everyone was talking about today, at least for a while. It was a different celebrity. His buddy, Ye. Kanye West showed up at the federal courthouse in New York today, and what an appearance it was. Made a big entrance. He did not come in at the beginning of the day, and in fact, it was a little unclear whether he'd even be able to get into court because testimony had already begun. But he rolled up, got out of his car, walked in, all head to toe in white denim, and then was met at the door by Diddy's son, King Combs. But when he went inside, I think things did not go the way that Ye expected them to go. Obviously, he's going there because he wants to show support for Diddy, and really he would be the first of his celeb friends to show any support, any public support at least, for Diddy, and the only celeb who would have shown up at court to support him. But he did not get to go into the courtroom. He walked into the courthouse and then was told that he couldn't go into the courtroom and he'd have to go into the overflow room. Now, the overflow room is where they have a lot of other reporters, media gathered watching, essentially just watching the trial on a big TV. And we're told from our reporter, Jacob was in that overflow room. That's where he watches every day. And there was a big commotion in there. They actually, the deputies came in, they cleared off a bench at the back of that room, and it seemed like that's where they were expecting Kanye to watch. But then there were a lot of people coming in and out, and even some of Diddy's attorneys stuck their head in, kind of looking for Ye. Didn't see him in there. Well, it turns out what the deputies decided was that it was just going to be too much of a commotion, too much of a distraction if you were sitting in that room with all the other media. I mean, let's be honest. If you're a reporter and you're in that room, you're no longer looking at the trial. You're watching Ye to see how he's reacting to things that are being said in the trial. So they decided to not bring him in there. He got his own private overflow room. And he was only there, so he sat down in there with King Combs, but he was only there for about 10 minutes. If you know anything about Ye, once he realized that there wasn't going to be this big show of him walking into court and everyone gasping and, him trying to wave to Diddy or whatever it is, that once that was not happening, he decided he was out of there. He literally was in the overflow room for about 10 minutes and then walked out and was gone. Didn't have anything to say when he left, and that was it. So, with that whole circus out of the way, what actually happened in the trial today? Only two witnesses on the stand, and one of them, the first was a special agent, Andre Lamont, and he ran through a lot of things that we already knew about the raids. He was going over basically an inventory of things that they found at the LA home during the raid. Talked about weapons, talked about drugs, ketamine, ecstasy, and the weapons, aside from the guns, he also talked about the ammo that was found and that it was armor-piercing bullets that they found there, which we had known that from the indictment. It always seemed weird to me that Diddy would need that kind of ammunition, but he didn't really get into what it could be used for, just talked about this is what they found. Then there was something that I guess you could say is a bit of maybe freak-off shaming, you could call it. We've all heard about the baby oil. We've heard about the personal lubricant that was found and the amounts that were found. But he went through the numbers, and I guess you feel like maybe the prosecutors felt like they've probably heard about this. We need to let the jury know what was found there, because if we don't bring it up, they're going to be going, wait a second, remember all that stuff we heard about baby oil? How come that didn't come up in the trial? So the special agent said they found 200 bottles of baby oil. 200. This is just in the LA home. And lube, 900 bottles. I can't even imagine, how did he order 900 bottles of lube? It's mind-boggling. Anyway, they covered that, and then they moved on. The next person on the stand was Jonathan Perez, and Jonathan was a former assistant for Diddy, and he reported, at least he said for a time, reported directly to Christina Karam, who is the chief of staff, former chief of staff for Diddy. Now, what Jonathan was talking about was what he had to do as an assistant. Now, he said that this was only about 1% of his responsibilities. That seems, if this is only 1%, I'm not sure what else they had this guy doing. But he talked about king nights. Now, we've heard Cassie call them freak-offs. We've heard Jane call them hotel nights. The employees, at least, Jonathan testified, knew them as king nights. That's the way it was described to him by Christina, that every now and then Diddy would have these king nights where he would stay at a hotel with a woman. Jonathan said that it was usually Jane when he was setting these things up. And he talked about what the setup was about, that they would get enough supplies in there for about 12 to 24 hours of fun for Diddy and whoever else was in there. And he wanted 12 to 24 hours where he wouldn't have to call Jonathan or any other assistants, that he could just be there without bothering anybody. Things they had to set up: food, liquor, music, red lights, condoms, lube, and sometimes honey. And this was interesting. I think a lot of the things you hear about honey and what it's good for in your health. I hadn't heard this one, but said that Diddy would have honey as part of the setup because it enhances the libido. So there's some news you can use. Beyond that, Jonathan talked about drugs that he would have to set up. He said sometimes he would get Xanax, cocaine, and Molly. He said only about a handful of times from, and here's a couple of colorful characters to add to the mosaic of this trial. He said the dealers that he would get it from were people named Guido and Baby Girl. Pretty sure those were not their given names, just their professional names. But he talked about all of that setup. And then let's talk about the aftermath, because if Jonathan had to go in and set up for all of this and then 12 to 24 hours, maybe even longer, we've heard testimony that sometimes these went as long as 3 days. But he said he would also have to go in and clean up the hotel rooms. And he talked about a text exchange that he had with Christina, who was asking how the cleanup was going. And he texted back to her, well, I've slipped and fell twice. He didn't say what he slept and fell in, but if you have that much lube and that much baby oil, you can kind of figure it out. When you hear all these things that Jonathan had to do, you just go like, God, I hope this guy was getting some hazard pay. He did testify as to what his salary was, so you can decide if this would be enough for you. He said he started out at $80,000 a year. That's nothing to sneeze at, and actually went up to $100,000. But man, cleaning up after those freak-offs. Anyway, $80,000 to $100,000. That's what he said his salary was. And then on cross-examination, this was interesting because they made Jonathan talk about the fact that, one, he had many other responsibilities. The King Nights were just a small part of that. And they asked him also how he felt about Diddy. And he said, actually, he was asked this by the prosecutors, which is also interesting, that the prosecutors asked him how he felt about Diddy today. And he said, I feel great about him, the same way I felt when I was leaving my employment, which is an odd thing after all those things he just said he had to do, which you would think would be very distasteful. He said he still felt great about Diddy. He said that on cross-examination, he had never seen him be violent with anyone, and that, which I thought was an odd thing to ask him because, I mean, we all, as part of this testimony, we've seen the Cassie video, the jurors have seen it, they know about it, so why does it matter that Jonathan never saw him hit a woman or anybody else, but they had him talk about that. And then he talked about some text messages between himself and Jane where they were talking about the things he needed to pack up, that Jane would ask him to pack up for these King nights. And I think that was interesting because what they wanted to point out was that Jane was involved in setting up these things. And again, this is all about trying to make it clear that she was into this lifestyle and Diddy was not forcing her into that. That was what the defense got clear to the jury on cross-examination. So winners and losers. Today I got to say it's prosecutors, because they got back to, after several days of Jane being cross-examined and really making it murky for the jurors as to whether or not she was forced into this lifestyle or not. Today you just had people talking about the bad things, right? You had the special agent talking about all these things they found, the ammunition, the drugs, probably not that shocking to the jury anymore, but certainly the ammunition and certain firearms that had serial numbers scratched off. All of that just looks really shady, so that's bad. And then you have Jonathan detailing everything he had to go through as an employee of Diddy's. All that stuff isn't good. It's just not good for the character of Diddy. It's not good for what he was making employees and people in his organization do. And that's gonna inch closer to racketeering. I don't think the prosecutors have fully shown their cards on that yet, but today I would say the prosecutors were the winners. Next week, we are expecting the testimony of Brendan Paul, a guy whose face you probably remember when the raids went down. He got arrested after the raid in Florida when they went on Diddy's private jet. He was the so-called drug mule and who was arrested and charged, but those charges have been dropped. Perhaps because it was a first offense, it was a state charge, state crime. And they made a point when they dropped those charges of saying, the federal prosecutor said, we did not strike a deal with this guy. The charges were not dropped because we are letting him off of testifying. He is expected on the stand next week, and I'm sure he's going to have a lot to say about what he had to do under Diddy's employ. So looking forward to that next week, and maybe the prosecution will be wrapping up their case. Then we'll get to see who Diddy's team wants to call to the stand.